Hello everyone, welcome to AWS Tutorials. In AWS Tutorials, you learn about AWS services. Today, we are going to talk about how you can create Glue Job with Glue Job to work with Apache Iceberg Table. So let's get started. So first, try to understand what is Apache Iceberg Table. It is an open table format which supports incremental data processing. That means you can perform, create, update, and delete operations on your records. You can also make time travel query to go and see data, snapshot of data at a particular point of time. And it supports concurrent write scenarios. Today, I'm not going to cover Apache Iceberg in a greater length and how to implement such table in AWS. So if you want to understand about it, I created another tutorials and link of which I am going to provide in the description box below. You can use that tutorial to learn about implementing Apache Iceberg table on AWS platform. And if you don't know about how to create Iceberg table in AWS platform, then I would recommend that you see this video first and then you come to this tutorial. But if you already know how to create Apache Iceberg table in AWS, then you are good to go and you can continue with the tutorials. So let's move forward. So we all know that Glue supports incremental data processing, and in that support, it supports three frameworks. So it supports, other than Apache Iceberg tables, it also supports Apache Hudi. It also supports Linux Foundation Delta Lake. So all three are incremental data processing frameworks, and they are all supported by Glue. The Glue version has to be 3.0 or later. But today I'm going to talk about Apache Iceberg only. I'm planning to create two more tutorials where I can cover Hudi and Delta Lake as well, because if I try to cover that here, the video will become very long. So I will create two other tutorials talking about Hudi and Delta Lake. So moving forward. So when you're trying to work with Iceberg tables, Glue version 3.0 or 4.0, any of that works, but they work with a specific Iceberg version as shown on the screen. Today I'm going to talk about Glue version 4.0 only. One of the primary difference other than Iceberg version is that in Glue version 4.0, in order to support concurrent write scenarios, Glue 4.0 implements its own optimistic locking mechanism. But in case of Glue 3.0, you have to use a DynamoDB table for that purpose. So for that, it needs some additional configuration. So Glue 3.0 needs some additional configuration with DynamoDB table to support concurrent write scenario. But in Glue 4.0, you don't need to do such things. It supports its own locking mechanism, optimistic locking mechanism. So in this video again, I'm going to talk about Glue version 4.0 only to keep the video small. But if you go through AWS documentation, you will see that if you're using Glue version 3.0, what additional configuration you have to do to work with Iceberg table and Glue Job. And if you find any struggle with that, let me know. I will happy to make a video on a specific version 3.0 as well. So moving forward. So what does it take to enable Glue Job for Iceberg table? And configuration is pretty straightforward, but it's a very particular configuration which you have to do. So basically you have to configure two specific job parameters, and your Glue Job will start supporting Iceberg table. The first configuration is you have to use this data lake formats as a key for your job parameter, and your value should be Iceberg. This tells Glue Job that you are working with Iceberg table format, data format I mean. And the second one is that you have to create a key called conf, which stands for configuration. And then you have to set up the following key value pair, which primarily, if you look into detail, is talking about what is going to be my extension, what is going to be my catalog, where is my warehouse location, and there you have to be very careful and you make sure that you provide S3 location for S3 location for where your Iceberg table is created. Okay, so this is the S3 root location for Iceberg table. Then it talks about how is your catalog implemented, which is using Glue catalog. Then how is your input output implemented, and that is using S3 file IO, because we are creating an Iceberg table using S3 as a storage location. So these are the few configurations which you have to do. Everything is pretty much what I see on the screen. Only part which you have to change is where you create the warehouse. There you need to provide the S3 location where you have created your Iceberg table. And that's why I told you that you need to know how to create such table using S3. And if you don't know, as I mentioned earlier, please use my other video to learn about it. And then you can continue from here. So moving forward. So other than doing it in a configuration, you can also set up this configuration, like other than setting this configuration in job parameter, you can also set up this configuration in code. So what you can do is that if you put your Glue, this code, which I'm showing on the screen in your Glue job, you can actually you can set up the same configuration. But so there are two mechanisms, the same thing we are doing, but two mechanisms. The first mechanism was I was using Glue job parameter to set up the configuration, and the second one you can see I'm using Spark configuration set method to set up the configuration, but it's the same key value pair or same environment setting. You can see I'm saying that what catalog I'm using, what warehouse, implementation, and IO. Yeah. So same thing, but you can do the same thing in code. It is up to you. Where do you use it? Whether you set it in the code or where you use a job parameter. Moving on. So once you do this key value pair, actually your Glue job will understand that, okay, fine, I am intended to work with Iceberg table. Also, not that you can only work with Iceberg table. So keep this in mind. If you're configuring your Glue job with these parameters, coming back to this again, if you're configuring your Glue job with these parameters, the Glue job, other than with normal table, can also work with Iceberg table. So it's not that it can only work with Iceberg table. That is very important. It can work with Iceberg table and other standard tables as well. So coming back to this. So how do I read data from Iceberg table? You have to use a very specific method, and that specific method is Glue context create data frame from catalog. So this is, in this method, you are creating a data frame from the catalog. So your Iceberg table this is your table name of your Iceberg table. This is your database name. You can provide some additional options like push down predicates and those kind of things. But basically, yeah, you are providing. So this is a method which you can use to read data from your Iceberg table. Now, one thing to keep in mind, and people who are using Glue job for quite some time, they know that in Glue job, when you populate data from the table, like a standard table, you populate data in a dynamic frame. And dynamic frame is actually extension of data frame, with some additional methods and properties to use with. But in this case, what you see here, you get a data, you get a data frame, not dynamic frame. So in your Glue job, depending on what business logic you want to implement, you will see a requirement where you have to convert this data frame you read over here, to a dynamic frame. And for that, you have to use this kind of mechanism where you can import a dynamic frame library, and then you can simply say, you're simply saying that dynamic frame from .df, and then you can provide your data frame, Glue context, and it will convert that into dynamic frame. So this is something very important for you to know, that when you're reading data from Iceberg table, basically it is a data frame, not dynamic frame. So if you want to use dynamic frame methods, mechanisms, then you have to convert your data frame into dynamic frame the way I have shown it on the screen. So having understood how you can read data from the Iceberg table, let's talk about another mechanism of reading data from Iceberg table. And that mechanism is not using glue catalog. So in this case, so in the first method, you can see here that I'm using a database name and table name. So I'm basically working with catalog to read data. But in this mechanism, actually, you can use Spark to read data from the S3 location itself. So in this case, I'm saying that I'm reading data from the S3 location where this Iceberg table has been created. So this is the S3 location where the Iceberg table is created, and I'm simply reading data from there. You can do this as well, but as I mentioned, that generally people catalog their tables for search and discoverability purposes. So it would make sense they use that mechanism. But yeah, otherwise, as an alternative, since AWS documentation talks about it, I thought I will tell you that you can also use a Spark read mechanism to read directly data from the S3 bucket. Now, how do I write data to the Iceberg table? So the method is pretty straightforward again. In this case, you can simply use glue context, write a data frame from catalog, and you are writing data to this database, this table, and this is the data frame which data you want to write to the table. So this is how you can write data to Iceberg table, where your data frame data can be simply written to your database and table. Again, keep this in mind that when you write data to the table, then you are writing data frame, not a dynamic frame. So in the case, if your data is in dynamic frame, then you have to convert that into a data frame first before you can write. And for that, this is the method you should use. You can simply say dynamic frame.toDF to convert that into a data frame. And then, of course, after that, you can write your data to the Iceberg table. So that's how you write data to the Iceberg table. There are some limitations which you should be aware of. So first is right now it's not working with AWS Lake Formation registered tables. So if your data lake framework tables are registered with Lake Formation and you want to make it work with Glue Job, right now it is not supported. Grouping of small files is not supported at this point of time, and job bookmarks are not supported at this point of time. So these are the few things you should know what is not supported when you're using a Glue Job with Iceberg table. So time for a demo. So what we are going to do, I have created a standard catalog table using S3 based data, which and for that we'll create a Glue Job, which will read data from here and then write to an Iceberg table. So we will perform one write operation to the Iceberg table. And then in the second one, we will read data from the Iceberg table, and then we'll write to the S3 bucket. So, so these two operations, read and write operation, we are going to perform on Iceberg table. So let's get started in a demo. So here we are at AWS Management Console. Let me show you a few things which I've already configured to save time. So if I go to my here this table, So here I have, as I told you that I'm going to read data from S3 catalog table, and then I'm going to write it to Iceberg tables. For that, I have already configured some data. So there's some source users which I have configured in this particular bucket folder. And if you go to Glue Catalog, if I go to Glue Catalog, this table looks like this, which is basically reading a user ID, username, and some credit, some random table just to show the demo. And if I want to see how does my data look like, I can go to Athena and show my source data. So select star from source users. If I if I do that, run it, and I should see my data. So this is how my 7 records you can see here: user ID 1 to 7, username 1 to 7, and some credits for the users, which I'm going to use as my source data. Now, there is a folder called user data, which where I'm going to create my Iceberg table. So this right now it is empty, but this is where I'm going to create my Iceberg table. So table where I'm going to write data and also read data in a later job. Now, I told you that once I show you how to write data to the Iceberg table, then I'm going to read data from Iceberg table and write to an S3 bucket location. This is that location. This is the location where I'm going to read data from Iceberg table and write to this S3 bucket location. I'm simply going to refresh it, and that should be empty. Fair enough. So this is all good. Now, what I need to do is that let's create the Iceberg table first. So if I go to Athena, and so in Athena you can see here that I have DojoDB. So if I go to my catalog one more time, so you can see here I have created this database DojoDB. And there right now I have my source user table. This table you guys simply ignore. This I have simply created for some other tutorial which will probably come next week. Yeah, so I have my source user tables created. So what I need to do in the same database, I'm going to create my Iceberg table first. So I go to Athena, and then I do some copy paste job from my other screen. So if I can say, fair enough. Yeah, here we go. So create table users, and I'm creating the same schema: user ID, username, and credit. This is the location. So this is the location where I'm creating the Iceberg table. And keep in mind, guys, when I was talking about presentation that at various parameters you have to provide the S3 bucket location, this is the location I was talking about. This is the location where you're creating your S3, your Iceberg table. So this location you have to provide there. Then I'm simply saying my table property is it's a Iceberg type table, and format is Parquet. So let's create this table. Run, and it should not take very long. Yeah, see, my users table is created, which is an Iceberg type table. Now I can say select star from users, and if I do that, I should see nothing because it's a new table. Which I just got created. So okay, I don't know why it's taking a long time. Probably my query getting queued. Yeah, so yeah, here we go. I get no result back. Fair enough. So now that we have seen it, what we need to do is that we need to create a glue job which will read data from my source table and write to the users table. So let's go to the glue job and say I want to create a script editor based job. Create. Okay. So let me configure, before I write a few things, let me configure a few things in my job details first. So first thing first, let's put this give job a name, and I'm saying that this is Dojo Ice write job, because I'm writing to the Ice table. My role is Dojo Glue role. Okay. Then my framework is Spark. My version, as I told you, I'm going to use 4.0 only, because if I'm using 3.0, then I have to do some additional configuration with DynamoDB table to support concurrent writing, which I'm not doing to save time. So I'm simply using Glue version 4.0. Rest, I leave everything else by default. Number of retries 0. Fantastic. If I go to advanced, then I simply, yeah, here we go. I need to set up job parameters. So now I'm going to set up job parameters. Remember the 2 set of parameters which we have to configure. So if I simply say add new job parameter, it will say, I will say, okay, my data lake format is Iceberg. So my data lake format is Iceberg. So this is good. Now I need to add additional parameter, which is conf, and there I set a very bigger value. So here I set a very big value, and the value I show on the screen. Basically, I'm setting up the parameters, various parameters to show the implementation, IO implementation, catalog implementation, and so on. What is important, I told you there is something called warehouse locations. I just want to show you. See my warehouse location. This is my warehouse location. That is S3 dozo my data users data. Same location where my Iceberg table is created. And then I save it. So what I have done so far in my Glue Job configuration is primarily two big changes. One is I have selected my Glue version to be 4.0, and then I came all the way down and I set up two different job parameters. One is conf, which is configuration. Second is data lake format. Good. Now I can write my code. So if I go to my script, it looks all good. Just segregate here. So I'm going to simply use out-of-box code. No change into that. And I'm going to simply add. So first I'm going to read data from my source table. My source table, as I mentioned earlier, is basically if I go to Athena, my source table is source users, from where I'm going to use read my data. So what I will do is that I'll simply write code which will read data. So all it is doing that I'm reading, I'm creating a dynamic frame from catalog. This is the database name and this is the source username. And guys, if you don't understand these things, I think I have created few videos about where I talk about how to use PySpark to create Glue Job. You might want to go through those tutorials, but I'm assuming that you know how to create a Glue Job. So now I have got a dynamic frame called users df. But remember, I told you that Iceberg table doesn't work with dynamic frame, it works with data frame. So what I need to do, I need to convert this into a data frame. So for that, I will use a different method called user df to df. So it converts your dynamic frame into data frame and then populate back to the same variable. So I converted my my data into a data frame, and then I'm simply going to perform the write operation. So I simply say glue context write data frame from catalog. This is my data frame which I want to write to my DojoDB and users table. And you guys, if you remember, you created this user tables, which is nothing but the Iceberg table. So pretty straightforward code. As you can see, I simply created a boilerplate code, and then I simply read data from my source table, convert into a dynamic frame. I perform no other data frame. I perform no other transformation. But generally, you want to perform some transformation, but my job here to show the read and write operation, so I'm not doing any transformation. And then I simply write it to the Iceberg table. Let's save it. Now my table is configured, the code is ready, my job details are ready, all looks good to me. I just want to make sure that it is Glue version 4.0. Yeah, fair enough. And now let's run this Glue job. So now I have run the Glue job, and it will take a couple of minutes, and then it should be populating data into my Iceberg table. So let's wait when the job finishes the execution. Okay, so you can see here that my job has successfully finished. So looks good to me. Now if I go to Athena and run the same query again, and if there's nothing wrong in my job and it has really successfully completed, I should see 7 records into my Iceberg table. So when I do that, yep, here we go. So I run select star from users, and I can see there I've got 7 records into my Iceberg table. So that was an example how you can read data from anywhere else and can write to Iceberg table. And I mentioned that once you create a glue job for Iceberg table, the glue job can still read data from other types of table formats. Like in this case, we are using a standard table which use high format. So now what we need to do, I want to show you how to read data from the glue job and write elsewhere. So for that, I have already created a job. So if I go to my Glue Studio console, you can see I have created a read job, Dojo read job. If I click on that, and if I go to my job details, again, you can see that it's a Dojo read job. My Glue version is 4.0, very important. And if I go to my advanced, I should see my job parameters configured. My job parameters are configured. The same configuration I have shown earlier. So this is good. Now let me see the script. So now if you look at the script, it's the same script, same boilerplate script, but what we are doing in this case, first I'm using this create data frame from catalog method. So using this method, I am reading data from the Iceberg table and populating it to a data frame. Again, I'm lazy, I'm not doing any transformation, but what I'm doing is that I'm converting my data frame into a dynamic frame now, because I want to use dynamic frame here onwards. So I simply, I'm using this dynamic frame from df method to convert a data frame into a dynamic frame. And once I have done, I can simply say, okay, fine, now write my dynamic frame. And this dynamic frame I'm writing to the S3 bucket location. This is the location which I showed you earlier. And I want to convert my data into a JSON format. And that's it. My job is done. So again, in this case, you can see here I'm reading data from an Iceberg table, and then I'm simply writing it to an S3 bucket. And only change I'm doing is I'm converting this data into a JSON format data. So if I save it just in case I did not make any change, and then I run it, it should perform the read operation from my Iceberg table. So let's finish let's wait for this job to finish, and then I can show you the output in S3 bucket location. Okay, so you can see my job has succeeded. That means this job has read data from my Iceberg table and has written to the S3 bucket location. Now if I go to my S3 bucket location, which is destination user, if I refresh it, you can see my data has been written over here. And then if I simply select this one and say, okay, let me inquire about it, query using S3 select. This is a JSON document, and then I want to give output in CSV. Let's remove the limit because I have only 7 records, and run the query. Yeah, you can see that all 7 records has been populated to the S3 bucket. So that was what I wanted to show today, that how you can create a glue job to read and write with Iceberg table. Hope you like the video, and if you like the video, please click on the like button. Please subscribe to my channel. I promise to come back again in a week's time with another such video. In the meantime, please stay safe and have a nice day. Bye-bye.